everybody, welcome back to Teens No Cap. I'm your host, Charity Chafee. I'm a licensed mental health counselor specializing in the treatment of teens and the families that love and support them. So today I figured I would jump on because there is a very kind of important holiday coming up, I guess if you want to call it that, which is Valentine's Day. And Valentine's Day, I know, has a societal, construct. There's a lot of heaviness, I think, that sometimes comes with it. But I thought it would be a great opportunity to really have a discussion about how, as a teen therapist, I approach and discuss relationships that teens are in and how I help support laying the groundwork for future relationships and how they might want to think or perceive them. And I think this is a particularly important topic for parents who are either trying to support their teen in one of their first relationships, or there's someone that has a preteen at home who's trying to figure out how the heck do we navigate this in a way that makes sense and help support our kid long term. So, welcome to our Valentine's Day chat-ski on relationships and their meaning. This is the teen edition. Sessions when I'm working with someone, we do talk a lot about love and relationships and intimacy and what all of those things mean and how they pair together with that teen, either currently, in the past, future, etc. And I think that the thing that comes up for me is oftentimes when I think about relationships and what maybe I was taught as a younger human was a lot of the Disney stuff where you meet someone, you fall in love, it's signed, sealed, delivered, that is your happy ending, that is done. And I think that although that approach has changed a little bit, I still do think there's this kind of Romeo and Juliet vibe with some teen relationships where they're like, I'm going to meet my person, we're going to fall in love, it's going to happen, without necessarily understanding the timeline of when that's going to make the most sense for them or when they're actually ready. So I like to use a layered approach to discussing relationships and to ensure that the teens have a support structure to understand the place of growth and personal development and not just the let's just fall in love and be done mentality. So first things first, the way that I often will frame relationships for teens is that it is often an opportunity for growth, and it's laying the foundation and the groundwork for future relationships, potentially with other people. I try to demystify the idea that you're going to meet your sweetheart, your love forever in high school or in middle school or in elementary school. And I really try to help them understand that the relationships they have in middle school and high school are meant to be just that sometimes. And I'm not saying that it never happens where you meet your high school sweetheart and fall in love and get married, but it's much more rare than we would like to believe. And I do think that that kind of magical thinking leads to the point of kids feeling frustrated, teens feeling like they're not in that relationship that they quote unquote should be in. I think it makes kids and teens feel badly that they're not in that relationship and potentially watching other peers be in those relationships that feel very serious and very heavy and like they're missing the bus or they're behind in that development, but that doesn't have to be the case. So when I'm talking with teens, I often try to support parents in having kind of this shared mentality in the family around what those relationships are meant to be. And I think if we talk about relationships as you're dating someone and you're always in love with that person, it also is kind of feeding this false identity of I'm dating this person, so I should be in love with them. And if I'm in love with someone, we should get married, right? So we're trying to work through a lot of the shoulds, coulds, woulds of relationships in a way that feels very practical and driven by that teen's own identity and own development and own growing edges. So first things first, a relationship in middle school and high school is often the grounding foundation for future relationships. So what that means to me as a therapist is I want to ensure that they have a safe, comfortable, and supportive space to discuss that and really dig in and understand the different things that are happening, why they're happening, how they could have done differently. And I want to lead them in the space of this is a growing opportunity for you to understand yourself in relationship with a partner. Now, that doesn't mean that we should dismiss or condemn teen relationships, because I do feel like they're important. When we think about teen development, we often think about the fact that sometime in their like early teens, their peer group tends to be the most important group of people for them. And we know that like the feelings of belonging and attachment are really important, and that is something that also contributes to people like wanting to date and maybe not totally understanding what that whole thing is for. So relationships for me in my work is always a space of grounding. It's always a space of learning. It's always a space of being able to understand them from the perspective of like, how do you think your partner sees this? And what do you like about your partner? And, how do you know when you're comfortable with someone and when you're not? What are your boundaries in relationship? We want to create a space when we're talking with our teens that feels like they can really air their thoughts, their feelings, their grievances, and that we as adults are not going to take over and be like, yeah, your partner sucks and I don't know why you put up with that and you should definitely like break up with them, because no teenager wants to be told to like break up with their person. The caveat here being if it's a healthy relationship, right? Obviously, if they're in a relationship that feels abusive or manipulative or has kind of qualities of like toxic or unhealthy relationship dynamics, we need to address that and we should be really honest with that, but again, in a supportive way. So the things in therapy that I usually spend time talking about with people is like thinking about, why did they start dating this person, or what do they like about this person? How does this person make them feel, right? What do they really know about them? What have the conversations been like? If you had to describe them, what is that? I want to know all of the nitty-gritty about this relationship because I want to understand the downsides, the upsides, the pitfalls, anything that might be contributing to this relationship. Because when we have those deep discussions about relationship, it often means that we are learning something about the teenager. We are learning about how they think, how they feel, how they process. We're learning about how they view attachment and what they're kind of geared towards. And the thing that I'll say that I think a lot of people hate or find controversial is that our parents in so many ways are the first blueprint we have of attachment, of regulation, of value in relationships, in meeting and conversation, communication, etc. So that is part of why I think it can be so impactful for a teenager to be supported in relationship, is because we're going to be able to reflect on these pieces and own up to potentially be like, yeah, like I did that a lot when I was your age, or I used to have this thought about myself all the time and led me to like this relationship, right? We want to create a space where we are learning and growing and being reflective of our own attachment, maybe with our parents or like them with you, and really creating a space that can have these kind of like deeper discussions on how we got here and why we're here and what we want to do about it and if we like it, etc. So if we think about the fact that our relationships with our parents and the dynamics that are present in our home are a groundwork, foundational piece of our future relationships, it gives us a lot of understanding about where we're starting and where we might want to go, which is why I think it can be really helpful and really supportive to allow teens to be in relationship with each other, pending healthy boundaries and expectations and conversations in this layered approach. Oftentimes I do get parents who are like, oh, my kid's not going to date until college. I don't want them in a relationship. I want them to focus on themselves. And I can understand that component, but I will also counter you with this. So if you have a teenager who has never been in a relationship, they don't really know what that looks like, they haven't had a lot of conversations about it because you have been like, abstinence is the key, I don't want you in a relationship, so we're not going to talk about it. What often happens is that they end up in college in relationships that may or may not be healthy, they don't know how to really handle it, and there's also no one that's consistently overseeing or like observing that relationship to be able to give valid feedback. So you may have someone who's like 19, 20 who's in college and dating, and maybe they have some friends that are giving them feedback, but at the end of the day, it is a friend and it's not necessarily a parent. And I would rather be able to supervise or support or encourage conversation with teens that I'm working with or parents that are parenting teens to ensure that there is some observation, there is some feedback, there is some awareness of how they are in those relationships. And I know, again, there's lots of parents that are like, they need to focus on themselves, but I would also argue if we're talking about teen mental health and teen livelihood and teen health and wellness, that being able to understand and replicate healthy dynamics and relationships is actually them focusing on themselves and having them understand themselves in a lens in that relationship. So again, I would definitely say that if a teen is interested in a relationship, and it could be a healthy relationship with someone who, they have chosen for various reasons, and you're having conversations about why they might be excited about being with that person, then we should support that. The other thing I spend a lot of time talking about is this kind of like fall in love and be done mentality, because I think a lot of teenagers, when we're thinking about our own understanding of ourselves as teenagers, or we're thinking about the media that we're watching, it's a lot of it's a lot of shows where someone just like falls in love and like, they work through some little conflicts, but there is this mentality of like, accept me exactly as I am, and it's obviously through a teen lens. The Summer I Turned Pretty, My Life with the Walter Boys, right? There's all these shows out here now that are really like, we fall in love. There's a little conflict here and there, but what they're not always seeing is the long-term work and the long-term effort that goes into those relationships. So when we talk about love in session, we talk about how that is very much a growing concept within anyone, that the way in which you love and receive love as a teenager might be very different from the way that you conceptualize love in 20s and 30s and 40s, etc. So we're not talking about the, I'm falling in love and I'm done mentality. We're talking about the fact that love takes commitment, that love takes consistency. I love this activity in session is really understanding these kind of bigger key words, code words that we have that we use as adults in society all the time. So one of those words that I give a lot of examples for is trust. So when we're thinking about trust is this kind of like vague concept that has a lot of different lenses and components to it in the same way love does. So in us understanding what our definition of love is and what makes up love is going to be really important, and them understanding whether or not that is actually present in their relationship. And the thing is that the perception or the experience I have of love could be very different from somebody else's experience of love, which is why we have to leave it in a space where we can ask questions, we can help them refine and define and understand that for themselves, but we don't necessarily get a full say in what they end up viewing love or trust, etc. as. So for instance, trust, if we're going to break that down, trust takes consistency, it takes transparency, it takes communication, right? So if we're looking at all the features that are underneath of trust, we have a better understanding of what trust actually is and what smaller micro behaviors we can do that are going to help support someone in trusting us. But if we're only ever using words like trust and love, and teens don't really understand what that is, or we haven't had that conversation and helped them define it or helped us understand where they're coming from when they say that, we are leaving ourselves in the dark. So when we're talking about love, what makes love, right? What makes you feel loved? What makes you feel like you love other people? Like what does it take to love someone? Really helping them understand the deeper components of that. So they realize it's not just like, I'm going to fall in love and be fine. It's really like love is this thing that morphs and grows as we get older, as we understand ourselves in deeper and better ways. And sure, I may fall in love, but it takes work to stay in love. And so I think that is an important piece to be discussed either in session or in the home with teenagers and also preteens and your younger kids, because again, when we're talking about this layered support structure, we're talking about all of these kind of little conversations that are built on top of each other that get to this point that help them get to this point about whether or not they're ready for a relationship or they're in this relationship and want to be. It's not just to fall in love and let's like do this thing and be done. The other important thing that often comes up is the ability to kind of remain neutral and to stay curious about someone's experience in a relationship. So when I talk about maintaining neutrality, what I'm talking about is really staying away from kind of demonizing or making someone feel or look evil or being like, oh my God, I'm obsessed with your boyfriend. He's great. There's all these good things, right? We as humans are never going to be perfect, and there are absolutely things about us that people can love and appreciate and things that maybe bother them or frustrate them or upset them. And so when we're having these conversations, we want to be very careful that we're not giving this perspective of either our child or our teen or their partner being the most perfect person ever of all time. Because when we think about that, we think about the potential fallout if and when they, break up before or after high school, college, is that they're like, oh, I lost the best thing that ever happened to me, right? I lost the perfect person, like this was perfect. And the chances of it actually that being real is low, right? Because we're human. Again, we make mistakes. We're not always considerate. There's lots of different things that happen in relationships that we can't predict. So we want to stay away from kind of like glorifying any of it or making anyone feel like it's so perfect, like you can't lose this person, they're like great for you. Because even if we have that thought and feeling as a parent or as a therapist, we need to be really careful about what the outcome would be as if that relationship ended. So staying neutral, staying curious, right? Asking lots of questions, being able to understand it. I did an entire episode a while ago on sex in relationships, and so I'll link that episode below. But I think that is also like very pertinent as part of this. If you have teenagers, we know abstinence is not always the best way to deal with, teen sexual health and teen curiosity. And so that episode has a lot of really great understandings of how to have those conversations and maybe why some of it is important to discuss, and a lens that would be really helpful for developing teens. So I'll link that all below because I think it's important. So I'm not going to go into that entirely here because we're just talking about how we support and how we structure relationships and understanding of relationships to make sure our teens can get the support and the experience that they're looking for. So maintaining neutrality, staying curious, really having the understanding that this relationship isn't something to be dismissed because there's still value in every experience, even if it's only a month or 2 or 3, but being able to really sit with the idea that we want to support them in those relationships. And people think that I'm crazy sometimes when I say this, but I also feel like if we're talking about long-term setting the framework for relationships in adulthood, I think that doing couples counseling with teenagers, 17, 18, could actually be so incredible for them. Because again, we're using these as experiences to help understand our behaviors and how we might push and pull in relationships and how we navigate things, how we get our needs met, how we problem solve. All of these things are foundations for future relationships, and we want to make sure that we're giving feedback and giving support and allowing people to learn and grow so that by the time they get to the point of being 20 and 30 and in relationships, they can do so in the healthiest way possible. So to the parents out there, the providers are there that are uncomfortable with teens dating or don't want to talk about it, this is a key part of teen development. And if you're not talking about that with your teen, or you're not talking about that in session with the teens you work with, you are missing a huge part of their development, and you're missing out on talking about a huge growing curve and space where they can really begin to understand themselves. So I am always an advocate for total overall teen health and wellness, and I think that does include sex and relationships and substance use and harm reduction and how do you meet your goals and conflict resolution and navigating difficult situations, right? There is nothing to me that is off limits in a therapy session, because I just want to make sure they know that they can talk about all of those things in session, and that I'm going to be a supportive person and helping them understand themselves from in all these different activities. So I guess to wrap up today, I know that a lot of us as teens and young adults and even other types of adults have had relationships that have been good, bad, and ugly. And I think that the more we can support these budding relationships as tweens and teenagers and helping people really understand where they're coming from and all the dynamics that are at play, the better relationships people are going to be able to have in their 20s and 30s. So I think a lot about how far we could be as a society if we just didn't have to consistently work on healing trauma, in the same way where I'm man, how much further or faster or more efficient or more safely could we get there if we didn't have to routinely heal things? And so from my perspective as a teen therapist, I advocate for people to be able to be in relationships pending the appropriateness and the conversations and it's the right age. I support them in being in these relationships so that they can begin to grow and understand themselves under some of the guidance and support of parents and guardians and friends and teachers that are witnessing that, to ensure long-term growth and development and understanding and reflection, so that 20s and 30s and 40s, when you're in these relationships, you're not struggling to figure it out and maybe getting sucked into abusive relationships and not knowing any better. So building the foundational skills, I think, is the key to helping understand and navigate divorce and long-term relationships and needs and attachment, all of the things. And in a lot of ways, breaking the cycles that maybe we went through in high school and middle school, and ensuring they have adequate and helpful support. So if you resonate with any of this, or if you have insights or perspectives, please drop them below. I'd love to have more of a conversation about this. I think it's time we think about teens as whole people and not just as people that we can control and say yes or no, you can date, or no, you can't. And I value their experiences in relationships, and I know that eventually one day they will be adults, and I want them to have the skills to be able to be the type of adults they would like to be and in the type of relationships they want to be in. So happy Valentine's Day to everybody who celebrates. If you are an anti-capitalist, anti-Valentine's Day person, please just take this as your sign to reflect on your relationships, either with your teen or to reflect on your teen's relationships. And I'd love your thoughts. So drop any thoughts you have below. Once again, I'm your host, Charity Chafee. I loved having you here. I could talk about this all day, but I will let you go. Have a great weekend.